What an extraordinary campaign. I can tell you something. I have never seen the British public less engaged with a general election in the 45 years that I've watched these campaigns. Nothing's working. Promises, 100 billion here, 200 billion there. Oh, they're going to put child murderers in prison for life. Really? We keep hearing promises, and my impression is that nobody believes a word that anybody is actually saying. So the general election is not taking off in any way at all. Corbyn is bombing. My prediction, you've heard it before on this show, it's a low turnout, all right? I do not think, unless something major shifts, it'll be a low turnout. I've been busy in Peterborough here today, a constituency that proves most of what you read in the newspapers to be total and utter tosh. Let me tell you why. The argument gets made that we will, of course, split the vote and let Labour in. If you want Jeremy Corbyn in number 10, vote for Nigel Farage. That's the kind of stuff that you hear. In this seat in 2015, when I led UKIP, we got 16% of the vote, and Stuart Jackson, a Eurosceptic Tory, won the seat. In 2017, UKIP decided not to field a candidate against Stuart because he was in the ERG. Guess what happened? Labour won. Why? Because so many of those Labour voters who'd come to UKIP in 2015 could not bring themselves in a month of Sundays to ever vote Conservative. So actually, had UKIP fielded a candidate, it still would have been a Conservative constituency. That argument moves on about splitting the vote. In the by-election here back in the summer just gone, Mike Green, our candidate, came within 600 votes of beating Labour. And Labour won, shall we say, due to some questionable practices around postal votes, engineered by a man who'd previously been convicted in this city of postal vote fraud. You couldn't make this stuff up. But actually, it was the Conservatives, coming a distant third, that split our vote and let a Remainer Labour MP into Westminster. So those arguments you read in the newspapers are completely disproved by constituencies such as Peterborough. I've been here today with Mike Green, out campaigning, and here's the point. This general election is actually 650 by-elections. In Peterborough, you can't vote for Boris, you can't vote against Boris, you can't vote for Jeremy Corbyn, you can't vote against Jeremy Corbyn. All you can do is vote for the man or woman that best represents your constituency. This election will be decided by tactical voting, seat by seat, from Remainers and Leavers making decisions as to what they want to do. I'm arguing in Peterborough, we've got Mike Green, an outstanding candidate, involved with local business, involved heavily with local charity, a Leaver who won't be three-line whip, will he, to vote for some shoddy, dreadful new EU treaty. So I'm encouraging here in Peterborough tactical voting. If you're Labour, well, even since the by-election in the summer, Labour is now much more Remain than it was then. After all, they want a second referendum with a choice of Remain versus, well, sort of Remain, really. And I think that in seats like this, all you can do is decide who is the man or woman best suited to represent your views in Westminster. We've got to hold Boris to account. Gosh, he backtracked even yesterday. CBI conference, his proposed cut to corporation tax was scrapped. He said the money would go to the National Health Service. Our proposal is 66% of corporations in this country earn profits of less than £10,000 a year. But they have to pay corporation tax. Can you imagine the cost to them? Can you imagine the cost to the Exchequer of actually collecting this money? And we would say no corporation tax if you're earning less than £10,000 a year. Let's try and get a bit of an entrepreneurial revolution going amongst those 5.7 million people already out there running their own businesses or acting as sole traders. Really important that we understand that the CBI, they're not British, they don't represent us, they're basically multinational corporations who couldn't give a damn about the nation state or our democracy. It's the small businesses who provide the employment, the small businesses who are absolutely the backbone of our economy. I pre-recorded Question Time last night. It's going out tonight on BBC One at 10:45. It was a bit of a bear pit. There were several members of the audience who I think were paid-up members of Momentum, banging on endlessly about the money I'd earned from politics. Believe you me, I made a big sacrifice to do politics. I didn't get richer through doing it. But I think you'll see in the programme when it's on this evening, I wasn't prepared to be bullied or talked down to by these people. And I made the argument very, very clearly, and this is key, that what's happened in the last 3.5 years is we've learned through the Brexit process that Westminster doesn't work. It is broken, it is bent, it is corrupt. You know the claims that I've made, and they're absolutely right about inducements being offered to people to stand aside for Brexit Party candidates. I'm having absolutely none of that, and none of the peerage stuff, believe you me. I don't want any of it. I don't want anything from these people other than to get a proper, clean Brexit delivered so that we are a free country. That, I think, to me, is vital. Anyway, watch it later on tonight. It'll be 10:45, I think it is, on BBC One this evening, Question Time. My 34th Question Time. Gosh, I'm a veteran. We'll see the Boris v Jeremy Corbyn debate later on. I have no doubt it will be dominated by endless negativity. You think I'm bad? Look at the other guy, he's even worse. I mean, that's almost what our politics has sunk to, and it's why I think the electoral system needs changing. If we had a system whereby you could vote for a man or woman to represent Peterborough, but on a second ballot paper, vote for an opinion, we might get people saying, vote for me in this election because this is what I stand for. Not vote for me because the other man or woman is really, really awful and worse than we are. It's negative politics, and I do think the appetite for political reform is no longer confined to the Oxford Union. I think people out there recognise they're not being represented by Westminster. We've got an electoral system that puts people off voting, a postal voting system open to fraud, abuse, corruption and intimidation, a House of Lords that is used to reward donors, to buy off political opponents, and a Supreme Court totally out of control because there's no written constitution to give them any rules or any guidelines. People have had enough. Brexit has exposed the fault lines that exist there within Westminster. It's not working for us. It's not functioning. At the moment, the election campaign is not taking off. Low turnout, as I said already, is my prediction. Maybe tonight, maybe something will spark between Grandpa Corbyn and Boris, but I really somehow just don't think so. Now, a theme that I've explored with you over the course of the last couple of weeks is this ludicrous idea that Brexiteers, people who believe in nation-state democracy, are somehow right-wingers, aged white males who hark back to Dunkirk and who somehow loathe everything that exists south of Calais, and the entire left support membership of the European Union. It is completely and utterly untrue. And I want to explore this now with somebody who is very much from the left of politics, but somebody who I was happy to recruit as a candidate to stand with us in the European elections in the Northwest. Name is Claire Fox. She represents the Academy of Ideas. She's a member of the European Parliament for the Brexit Party in the Northwest of England. And everyone said to me, Nigel, you must be off your rocker. There is no way that you and Claire Fox will be able to work together. And yet, and I've got to say this before we start, I've actually found her to be one of the easiest colleagues I've worked with in the European Parliament, because much as we might disagree on some social issues, we actually agree on the really big stuff. Claire Fox, welcome to On the Road.
Good to be here.
I'm making this point that somehow Eurosceptics are all elderly white males with extreme right-wing opinions, homophobes, semi-racists. Give us the Brexit perspective from the left, which is, of course, very much where you're from.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to me because actually Euroscepticism has got a very strong tradition on the left in British politics. Actually, around Europe, a lot of the left, a lot of the Eurosceptics are on the left, partly because it's a big protectionist racket for multinational corporations, the EU, and also because the left supposedly is associated with self-determination, and sovereignty is a very important part of that. So the absolute fury that I felt when the referendum was called and all these lefty Eurosceptics I knew suddenly went, oh God, we don't want anyone to think we're right wing, so maybe we'll sit this one out. And they just lost their bottom.
Just because of perception?
Perception, I really believe that. You know, even somebody like Owen Jones.
I remember, he came out saying he'd back Leave,
yeah,
and then in a volte-face back Remain.
He actually came up with the phrase Lexit, left-wing.
Yeah, I remember that, yeah.
You know what I mean? Because of the way that the Greek people were treated in the whole austerity regime imposed by the EU. So, you know, then they just lost their nerve. And I mean, obviously the most famous person is Jeremy Corbyn.
Now, do you know Jeremy Corbyn?
So I've known... No, I wouldn't say I know him well, but I mean, I will have been at left-wing meetings over the years that he will have been at. And the thing that you could say that he was consistent on was having a Tony Benn type approach to the European Union. He articulated it regularly. He consistently
He was
argued.
far more anti-EU than Tony Benn ever was. I mean, some of Corbyn's rants about the European Union make me look like a moderate.
I know, absolutely uncompromising. And so, again, you get into a situation, imagine that that's your lifelong passion, to be against the EU. You then, by accident, end up being the head of the Labour Party when a referendum is called. This is your chance to show leadership and principle. And what does he do? Shuts up. I mean, he might well have...
But isn't he a hostage? Isn't he a hostage,
He is a hostage.
to a parliamentary
Yeah.
Labour Party who are so overwhelmingly London-dominated and Remain that effectively, if he'd stood for his principles, they'd have turfed him out, wouldn't they?
I think that's true. And in that sense, you can have a bit of sympathy. The only thing is, I just think courage is required in that moment. And also, by the way, he tried to hold the line for a period of time, and he's just lost it now. I mean, he's tried to play both ways if you want, keep everybody happy, and of course that doesn't work. So anyway, so there's a very strong tradition of left-wing Euroscepticism, and it was obvious in the referendum campaign when I was going around. Just not part of any official campaign, but asked to speak at things. You would just meet people who it made sense to them that taking back control, to use that phrase.
Democracy.
The big issue for them was, my God, I do want to control my destiny. I do want to be in a situation where I can, say what happens in the future. And people didn't buy this idea that, there'll be no workers' rights or no women's rights if we leave the European Union, as though somehow it was on high from Brussels that any trade unionist had ever made a gain. Or this was absolutely nonsense. It was the actual opposite case. And, of course, everything from the undercutting of wages through the imposed freedom of movement, which, by the way, has got nothing to do with anti-racism.
No, it's always been portrayed that way. But isn't that what's frightened many on the left off?
Of course it has.
But you've stood firm. I mean, you and I have met before in the past, and I've listened to you on The Moral Maze on Radio 4, and I've always thought, crikey, I wouldn't want to meet her in a dark alley, But no, you've always fought for your opinions. You've always fought for free speech, for the ability of people to debate. And we've worked together remarkably well, I think, over the course of the last 6 months. But at what cost has this been to you?
Yeah, well, I think that I think that if somebody on the left who, if you want, I suppose I had a bit of a media love it, in as much as I was kind of part of the Radio 4 liberal media scene.
Of course.
I run the
and they all loved you. They all loved you.
I mean, they tolerated me. I think that they didn't love me, but I think that they thought I was their eccentric kind of lefty leave friend. But I ran the Academy of Ideas. We run this big festival, Battle of Ideas. And we have 450 speakers every year. They'd all spoken. They'd all been there. It was once one of their own turned. They didn't like that. And so there was a
But you
vicious
didn't turn.
assault.
But
No,
you didn't turn.
I didn't turn. Anyway, I simply decided that rather than commentating about my utter frustration with the sellouts around Brexit, that I maybe ought to do something about it. And you will know, because I didn't say yes straight away. I was rather reluctant. I couldn't reconcile it. I thought I didn't want to be a politician.
No, I know.
I was worried about my reputation. There's no doubt. I thought, I don't know what will happen. But the viciousness with which I have been treated was pretty savage. But I think that, you know, what people want to say is, oh, you become, you know, they say, oh, you become a far-right racist. And I mean, actually, everybody goes, no, she hasn't. I mean, it kind of gives, it's terrible.
Bonkers.
But of course, I'm able to fight back because, not only because I'm an MEP, because I'm a bit well-known. Imagine what it's like if you're Mrs. Smith, or you're John, Brooks, or whoever it is, and you're there, and all you've done is been a Labour voter all your life, but you've got this big chance. You decided to vote Leave. You was an anti-establishment vote. You were delighted when you won. You thought, we can change things now. Maybe we can get somebody to notice us and not patronise us all the time. And then your own Labour leadership and people in it call you a racist scumbag. I mean, it is so horrible. Your reputation produces that, or I mean, I don't even know. On the one hand, is the awful thing about being called racist when it's just so not true, or they say that you're an absolute mug who was conned, i.e. stupid. You know, that somehow you haven't got a university degree and you don't understand things. I mean, what an insult to people. As though, by the way, you need a university degree to understand things.
Well, that's the irony of it. Mr. Blair made us think that was absolutely fine. Yeah. But your story, so Lord David Stoddart, you know, who was a Labour minister in the 70s, and he told me once with great pride that the Times editorial in the 1975 referendum had branded him as somebody who wanted to leave the EEC, as a dangerous left-wing extremist, and that now in 2016 he was being branded a dangerous right-wing extremist, and he hadn't moved.
Well, exactly, and that's one of the things that's really funny. I mean, if you look at the attacks on me, 1 minute I'm, being accused of being a left-wing extremist, then a right-wing extremist, often by the same people at the same time, and all they're trying to do is delegitimise what was a democratic decision, and standing up for that decision.
And given all of that, I mean, I know the Academy for Ideas, you have your huge annual festival, and a remarkable sort of celebration of free speech and debate. And I mean, how are you getting on with that, with your funders, with your supporters? Are they making life hard for you with that?
I think that it's possibly not a coincidence that having very successfully run that festival at the Barbican Arts Centre, that we're not being invited back there next year. That they've
unbelievable.
I mean, who knows why? I say nothing. I think that possibly, the City of London Corporation that had sponsored the festival because it was at the Barbican were less than delighted that I stood as a Brexit Party candidate and made it clear. And I think that what you get is you get a sense of intimidation. And I made a joke to somebody, one of the people who was frightened off from funding us this year, and I said, if I'd stood for Change UK, or
you'd be a darling.
Would you feel the same? And they sort of laughed, and I said, well, at least you're being honest.
Well,
what they were basically saying was they were going to punish me, or not. I mean, I don't want to. It's not a victim thing, by the way, but of course, the interesting thing about the Battle of Ideas was there was as many Remain speakers as there were Leave speakers. Of course there were. But it wasn't just Brexit that we talked about. There was people from all across the political spectrum because, as you say, I believe in civil society, free speech, having these arguments out in a civilised way.
Well, I've got to tell you, I'm going to help Claire because this is outrageous. And this shows you the prejudice that exists within the establishment. Claire, thank you for joining us. Now, questions. I get hundreds of them. I'll try and quick fire a few because time is running out. Twitter says, the polls have gone down for the Brexit Party. Do voters trust the Tories more than you? The polls have gone down because we've stood down in 317 seats, because Boris made a promise and we intend to keep him to it. And remember this election isn't about national polls. There are 650 by-elections going on where people are deciding who do they want to be their Leave candidate or their Remain candidate. On Twitter, Tina says the behaviour of the Conservatives is just like that of the European Union. More incentive to keep on fighting. They have behaved, Tina, in the most disgusting manner. I'm going to get Claire in on this one. Norma on Facebook says, as soon as Anne Widdecombe came into the Brexit Party, I was with you. She's the most honest lady in politics. So, Anne Widdecombe, social conservative, Claire Fox, left-wing activist and campaigner. How do you get on with Anne?
Well, this is the interesting thing, isn't it? We actually can argue politically about some of those things we disagree with.
Yeah.
But we can recognise that as Democrats, the way these things will be decided is by the voters. And we're much more concerned about the fact that every establishment party, Labour and Tory, are prepared to trash democracy.
Yeah, absolutely.
You realise how fragile it is when you see them do that. So Anne's a stalwart on democracy and so on.
Yeah, good stuff. And I'll finish with this. 9